The Grand Hall of the Galactic Assembly was a marvel of engineering, with towering arches made of shimmering starstone and walls alive with holographic constellations. Delegates from countless civilizations filled the space, their murmurs echoing across the chamber. The air was tense, as always when the Xyloth Empire was present. Their reputation for ruthlessness was unmatched, and their champion, General Tyrell, embodied that fear. Standing over 7 feet tall, Tyrell was an imposing figure. Her obsidian-black armor glinted under the artificial starlight, and her crimson eyes scanned the room like a predator seeking prey. She was the Emperor's most trusted enforcer, known for her ability to crush rebellions without mercy. Few dared to meet her gaze. Fewer still lived to tell the tale. Amidst the towering alien delegates, a human stood out, not for his size, but for his apparent lack of fear. Commander Elias Thorne, Earth's first ambassador to the Galactic Assembly, stood calmly in his crisp navy blue uniform. Humanity had only recently joined the galactic stage, and they were considered weak by most advanced species. Their homeworld, Earth, was resource-poor and technologically behind. Yet here was Elias, radiating quiet confidence in the face of overwhelming power. The assembly came to order with a booming voice from the speaker, a towering insectoid alien with 6 glittering eyes. We are gathered to discuss the Xyloth Empire's recent expansion into neutral territories. General Cyril will represent the Empire. Cyril stepped forward, her voice cold and precise. The Xyloth Empire acts in the interest of galactic stability. The colonies in question were harboring insurgents. We acted decisively to eliminate the threat. There was an audible ripple of discomfort among the delegates. Insurgents or not, the Xyloth raids had left entire planets in ruins, their populations enslaved or worse. Elias took a step forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. General Cyril, with respect, your actions go beyond maintaining stability. You've turned entire worlds into graveyards. Gasps filled the room. A human, of all beings, daring to challenge the Xyloth general. It was unthinkable. Cyril's crimson eyes narrowed as she turned her full attention to Elias. And what would you know of galactic politics, human? Your species barely understands interstellar travel. Elias smiled faintly, his calm demeanor unshaken. True, Earth is new to this galaxy's politics, but we understand one thing well. Tyranny never lasts. You may crush planets under your boot for now, but history shows that no empire survives forever. The room fell silent. Even Tyrell hesitated, caught off guard by his boldness. For a moment, something flickered in her expression, a mixture of curiosity and irritation. Careful with your words, Ambassador. They might cost you your life. Before Elias could respond, an alarm blared through the hall. The holographic constellations flickered, replaced by a red warning light. A Xyloth officer rushed in, his voice urgent. General Cyril, there's been an attack on the neutral colony of Valesia. Rebel forces have retaliated against our patrols. Cyril's expression hardened. Prepare the fleet. I'll deal with this personally. Elias stepped forward again, his tone sharper now. General, a full-scale retaliation will only escalate the conflict. Let me mediate. Cyril laughed, a harsh sound that sent shivers through the room. You think I'll trust a human to handle Xyloth matters? Ridiculous. The speaker interjected, its multi-tone voice firm. Ambassador Thorne has a point. More destruction will only destabilize the region further. Perhaps mediation is the better path. Cyril bristled, but she could not openly defy the speaker in the assembly. Her gaze bore into Elias, filled with both disdain and a grudging acknowledgement of his boldness. Very well, human. Let's see if your words are as effective as your arrogance. Hours later, aboard the Xyloth flagship, Elias stood on the bridge beside Cyril. The view of space outside the massive windows was breathtaking, but the tension inside the ship was palpable. Xyloth officers moved quickly, avoiding eye contact with their general. Elias studied Cyril as she barked orders. her presence commanding and efficient. She was unlike anyone he'd ever encountered, intelligent, calculating, and utterly ruthless. Yet there was something else, a crack in her armor that he couldn't quite place. As the ship approached Valesia, the devastation became clear. The once thriving colony was reduced to smoldering ruins. Survivors huddled in makeshift shelters, their faces etched with despair. Elias's jaw tightened. "This is what stability looks like to you." Irel didn't answer, her expression unreadable. She ordered a transmission to the rebel leader, a grizzled alien with scars across his face. "You have one chance to surrender," she said coldly. The rebel leader snarled. "Surrender to you? Never. We fight because of monsters like you." Before Irel could respond, Elias stepped in. "Enough. If this cycle of bloodshed continues, no one wins. General Tyrell, let me speak with them." Tyrell hesitated, then nodded curtly. "You have 5 minutes. Don't waste them." Elias took the communicator, his voice steady and firm. "We don't have to keep killing each other. Let's find another way." As the rebel leader listened, Tyrell watched Elias closely. For the first time, she saw something she hadn't expected, a strength that wasn't born from power, but from conviction. And for reasons she couldn't explain, it unsettled her. The tension between General Tyrell and Commander Elias Thorne continued to simmer. The ceasefire agreement between the Xyloth Empire and the rebel forces was fragile at best. While the fighting had stopped, the animosity between Tyrell and Elias was only growing. They stood on opposite sides of a vast chasm, but neither could deny the strange respect forming between them. In the command center aboard the Xyloth flagship, Elias sat in front of a large holographic display. He studied the intricate web of galactic politics, military strategies, and the long history of the Xyloth Empire's rise to power. He had learned quickly that the Xyloths were no mere conquerors. They were skilled in manipulation, using fear as their greatest weapon. The Emperor's rule was built on a foundation of terror, and Tyrell was his most effective enforcer. Elias knew the Emperor's grip was weakening. The Xyloth Empire, while powerful, was beginning to crumble under its own weight. There were whispers of rebellion even within its highest ranks, and Elias believed Tyrell could be the key to ending the Emperor's reign. But first, he had to convince her. The day after the ceasefire, Elias was summoned to meet Tyrell in a secure chamber aboard the ship. She had requested a private conversation, something that was rare for someone as private and guarded as her. The chamber was cold, the walls made of smooth black metal that reflected no light. Only the soft hum of the ship's engines filled the silence. Tyrell stood by a massive window, her back to Elias. She was staring out into the endless void of space, her posture straight and commanding, as always. Her deep red eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. She didn't turn as Elias entered, but her voice was clear and sharp. "You've been quiet since our last meeting, human. What's your next move?" Elias took a breath, stepping closer. "I've been thinking. The way you operate, the way the Empire operates, it's a system built on fear, Tyrell. But fear doesn't last forever. Sooner or later, people stop being afraid." Tyrell's lips curled into a smirk, though her eyes remained cold. "And what makes you think I don't know that? I've seen empires fall before, but not all are as strong as the Xyloth Empire." Elias didn't flinch. "I'm not saying the Empire isn't strong. I'm saying it's brittle. The cracks are already starting to show. You're too smart to not see it. The Emperor is weakening. His power is built on fear, and fear is a fragile thing." Tyrell turned slowly, her eyes narrowing. "And what would you suggest, Commander? You think you can just waltz in and change everything? You have no idea how deep the corruption runs. I don't need to change everything, but I can help you make a better choice. You're more than just an enforcer for the Emperor. I can see it. You've been questioning his methods for a long time, haven't you?" For a brief moment, Elias saw something flicker in Tyrell's eyes, a hesitation, a flicker of doubt. It was gone almost immediately, replaced by the familiar coldness that had made her one of the most feared beings in the galaxy. "You don't know me," Tyrell said, her voice low and threatening. "You don't understand the weight of what I've done. I've spent my entire life in service to the Empire, and I've seen what happens to those who turn their backs on it." Elias leaned forward slightly, his tone steady but insistent. "I don't expect you to change overnight, but you have a choice. You've always had a choice. The Emperor's empire is built on lies. It's crumbling. You can either keep serving a dying system, or you can be part of something better." Cyril's gaze hardened. "You don't understand. The Xyloth Empire is my life. My loyalty to the Emperor is absolute." Elias met her gaze, his eyes unwavering. "But it's not too late to change that." The silence between them stretched, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Then Tyrell broke the stillness, her voice soft but dangerous. "You're walking a fine line, human. Your words may have convinced me once, but I'm not easily swayed. If you think I'll abandon everything for your ideas, you're mistaken." Elias stepped back, sensing he had reached the limits of her patience. "I'm not asking you to abandon everything. I'm asking you to consider a new path. You've spent your life following orders. Maybe it's time to start thinking for yourself." Cyril didn't respond immediately. She turned back to the window, her gaze once again lost in the vastness of space. Elias stood silently behind her, unsure whether he had made any progress. After a long moment, she finally spoke. "You're persistent. I'll give you that." Elias smiled slightly. "It's one of my better qualities." Tyrell glanced at him over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. "You won't win me over so easily, Commander. But I'll admit, I'm curious to see how long your persistence lasts." Later that night, Elias returned to his quarters, his mind racing. He had planted the seed of doubt in Tyrell's mind. But that was only the beginning. The road ahead would be difficult, and the stakes were higher than ever. The Xyloth Empire was a behemoth, and Cyril was its most powerful weapon. But Elias had seen something in her, something that he believed could be the key to breaking the Empire's stranglehold on the galaxy. As he sat at his desk, staring at the stars outside his window, he couldn't help but wonder, was Tyrell just another pawn in the Emperor's game? Or could she be the one to bring the Empire to its knees? One thing was certain, Elias Thorne wasn't about to give up without a fight. The game had only just begun. The days following Elias's tense meeting with General Tyrell were filled with uneasy silence. Though their conversation had not brought a resolution, it had planted a seed of doubt in Tyrell's mind. She found herself, for the first time in years, questioning the path she had always followed without hesitation. But doubt was dangerous, especially when it came to the Xyloth Empire. The Emperor ruled with an iron fist, and any hint of disloyalty was dealt with swiftly. Meanwhile, Elias was working relentlessly to uncover the hidden truths of the Xyloth Empire. The more he learned about the Empire's history and its current state, the more he realized how fragile its power really was. Beneath the facade of invincibility, cracks were beginning to show. Whispers of rebellion were spreading within the Empire's ranks, and Elias believed that Cyril might be the key to exposing these weaknesses. One evening, Elias was deep in thought in his quarters, poring over documents he had acquired from sources within the galaxy. The Xyloth Empire had always been a mystery to most, its inner workings shrouded in secrecy. But Elias had a knack for finding hidden truths. He had managed to obtain classified information about the Empire's economy, its military strategies, and most importantly, its leadership. As Elias sifted through the data, he stumbled upon something that made his heart race. There were reports about the Emperor's failing health, both physically and mentally. His grip on the Empire was weakening, and the once unstoppable force that was the Xyloth Empire was now crumbling from within. The Emperor had relied heavily on fear to maintain control, but fear alone could not sustain an empire. Elias sat back in his chair, his mind racing. The Emperor was vulnerable. And if the Emperor fell, the Empire itself would be thrown into chaos. This was the opportunity Elias had been waiting for. He needed to act quickly, before the Emperor could consolidate his power once more. But there was one more piece of the puzzle that Elias needed to understand. Cyril. If she remained loyal to the Emperor, she would undoubtedly stand in his way. But if he could convince her to join him, the Empire would be thrown into disarray. Elias knew that convincing Cyril would not be easy. She was fiercely loyal, and she had been shaped by years of serving the Empire. But he also knew that she was not without doubts. He had seen it in her eyes, heard it in her voice. There was a part of her that questioned the Emperor's methods, and that was the part he needed to reach. Later that day, Elias found himself standing in front of Cyril once again, this time on the command deck of the Zyla flagship. The ship was vast, its dark corridors echoing with the hum of advanced technology. Cyril was at her usual post, commanding the ship's operations with precision. Her gaze remained fixed on the view of space outside the ship's window, as though she was lost in thought. Elias approached her cautiously, aware of the power she commanded. He had learned over the past few days that patience was key when dealing with Cyril. He had to choose his words carefully, as one wrong move could mean disaster. "General," he began, his voice steady, "I found something. Something that might change everything." Cyril turned her head slightly, her piercing red eyes locking onto him. "What is it, human?" Elias hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I've uncovered some documents, reports about the Emperor. His health is failing, both physically and mentally. He's losing control of the Empire." Cyril's expression didn't change, but Elias could see the slight tightening of her jaw. "What are you suggesting?" she asked, her voice cold but curious. "I'm suggesting that the Emperor's reign is coming to an end, and when it does, the Empire will be thrown into chaos," Elias replied, his voice growing more confident. "If you continue to follow him, you'll be swept up in that chaos. But if you help me, we can change the course of the galaxy." Cyril's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a faint smirk. "And why would I help you, human? What makes you think I would trust someone like you?" Elias met her gaze, refusing to back down. "Because you already know the truth. You know that the Emperor's power is built on fear, and fear is a fragile foundation. It won't last." There was a long silence as Cyril studied him, her expression unreadable. Then, without warning, she turned away, facing the vast expanse of space once more. "You're a fool if you think I'll abandon my loyalty to the Emperor," she said quietly. Elias took a step forward, his voice steady but urgent. "I'm not asking you to abandon anything. I'm asking you to see the truth. The Emperor is dying. His empire is dying. And if you continue to serve him, you'll only be left with ashes." Cyril didn't respond immediately. Instead, she gazed out at the stars, her eyes distant. Elias could see that he had made an impact, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. "You think you know everything, don't you?" Cyril finally said, her voice soft but filled with bitterness. "You think you can just waltz in and change everything. But the Empire is my life. It's all I've ever known." Elias's voice softened, his tone more sympathetic now. "I understand. But sometimes the things we've known our whole lives are the things that hold us back. You've been serving the Emperor for so long that you can't see the truth in front of you. But I see it, Cyril. I see the person you can be." Cyril turned back to face him, her expression hardening. "You don't know me, human. You don't know what I've done, what I've had to do to survive." Elias didn't flinch. "I know enough. And I know that there's more to you than just being the Emperor's enforcer. You have a choice, Cyril. You can keep serving a dying empire, or you can be part of something new." Cyril was silent for a long time. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice low. "You're walking a dangerous path, human." Elias nodded. "I know, but I'm not afraid." For the first time, Cyril's expression softened just slightly. She didn't say anything else, but her eyes lingered on him for a moment longer before she turned back to the view outside. Elias knew the conversation wasn't over. It was just beginning. And for the first time, he had hoped that Cyril might actually consider his words. Days passed, and the tension aboard the Scifi flagship was palpable. The fragile ceasefire had held, but there were murmurs of rebellion stirring in the galaxy. Whispers of discontent reached Elias's ears, and he knew that time was running out. The more he saw of Tyrell, the more he understood how torn she was. She had been a soldier all her life, molded by the Empire's ruthless ideals. Yet, in the quiet moments when she thought no one was watching, he saw the conflict in her eyes. She was beginning to question everything she had ever known. Elias spent his days gathering more intelligence, trying to find a way to bring down the Emperor without triggering a galaxy-wide war. He knew the task wouldn't be easy. The Xyloth Empire was vast, and its military was terrifying. But if he could sway Cyril to his side, they might stand a chance. Late one evening, as Elias was going over new reports in his quarters, a soft knock at his door interrupted his concentration. He looked up, surprised. It wasn't typical for anyone to visit him, especially not Cyril herself. Hesitant but curious, he stood and opened the door. To his surprise, Cyril stood in the doorway, her posture straight, but with a hint of uncertainty in her usually confident stance. She was no longer in her armor, but in a dark, form-fitting uniform that emphasized her strength, though her eyes betrayed a rare vulnerability. "Commander Thorne." Cyril's voice was calm, but there was something different about her, something that made Elias's heart beat a little faster. "We need to talk." Elias stepped aside, allowing her into his quarters. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on both of them. She had come here for a reason. He could sense it. This wasn't just another confrontation. Cyril didn't waste time. "I've been thinking about what you said. About the Emperor, about the Empire. You're right. It's falling apart. I've seen it, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do about it. I've spent my whole life serving the Emperor. He's all I've ever known. If I turn against him, I don't even know who I am anymore." Elias didn't immediately respond. He knew this was the moment, the one he had been waiting for. But he also understood that he couldn't rush her. Cyril had to come to her own decision. All he could do was show her the truth. "You don't have to decide everything right now, Cyril," Elias said quietly, his voice steady. "You've spent your life fighting for something you thought was right. But now you can fight for something better. Something worth believing in." Cyril's gaze softened for a moment, but she quickly hardened it again, her walls going back up. "And what exactly is that, Commander? What is this something better you want me to fight for?" Elias met her eyes, his voice firm but gentle. "A galaxy where fear doesn't rule. A galaxy where people don't live in constant terror of their rulers. A galaxy where the strong don't prey on the weak. You could help bring that about. You have the power to change everything." Cyril's expression wavered, but only for an instant. "You don't understand, human. It's not that simple. The Emperor has built this empire on fear, yes, but fear keeps people in line. Without it, everything will fall apart." Elias stepped closer, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "Fear doesn't hold people together. It breaks them. It breaks everything. What holds people together is hope. And that's what you can give them. You're the one they'll listen to, not the Emperor. They don't fear you, Tyrell. They respect you. And that's why you have a choice. You can be the one who leads them to a new future." Cyril's eyes flickered with something Elias couldn't quite identify. For a long moment, she didn't speak, her gaze fixed on the floor. Then, without warning, she turned sharply and walked toward the small window, gazing out at the stars. She spoke again, but her voice was quieter now. "I've always done what I was told. I never questioned it. The Emperor gave me purpose, gave me power. Now, I'm not sure what I have left. Elias stepped closer, his voice soft but sincere. You have a chance to rebuild, to find your own purpose. No one can give that to you but yourself. Cyril stood in silence for a long moment, her back still to him. Elias waited, knowing that this was a decision she had to make alone, even if he had shown her the possibility of a new path. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. And if I choose to fight against the Emperor, what happens then? What happens to me? What happens to us? Elias smiled, a rare and genuine smile that showed the weight of his own resolve. What happens then is that we fight together, and we bring down the tyrant. The future won't be easy, but it will be ours to shape. I'll be by your side. Cyril, we can't undo the past, but we can build a new future. For the first time, Cyril turned to face him fully. Her crimson eyes, usually so cold and unyielding, now held a flicker of something new, a spark of hope, however faint. I don't know if I can do this, she said, her voice still uncertain. I've been too long in the dark, but I'm willing to try. Elias nodded, his expression steady. That's all we need. One step at a time. We start by taking down the Emperor. Cyril stood there for a long moment, her expression unreadable, before finally speaking again. This is madness, she muttered under her breath, almost as if to herself. But when she looked at Elias, her eyes were different. But I'm willing to trust you. For now. Elias's heart skipped a beat. He knew this was only the beginning, but it was a beginning that he hadn't dared to hope for just a few weeks ago. They had made their first move. Now, it was time to take the next step. The galaxy would never be the same again. The decision had been made. Cyril's trust in Elias was fragile, but it was there. They had crossed an invisible line, and there was no turning back. Elias knew the path ahead would be dangerous, but now he had an ally, one of the most feared commanders in the galaxy. Together, they would strike at the heart of the Xyloth Empire. But first, they needed to gather allies and plan carefully. Elias and Cyril spent the next few days in constant communication, working in secret to build their alliance. Cyril used her position within the Xyloth military to gain access to sensitive information, while Elias gathered intelligence from rebel cells and sympathizers within the Empire. They carefully navigated the delicate web of politics and power, knowing that one wrong move could bring everything crashing down. The more they learned, the clearer it became that the Empire was crumbling from within. The Emperor's once unshakable rule was faltering. His health was deteriorating rapidly, and rumors of his death were beginning to spread. But the true danger came from his generals and the ambitious officials who were waiting for their chance to seize power. The Emperor's weakening grip had created a power vacuum, and the Empire was ripe for a change. Cyril stood in the command center of the flagship, her eyes scanning the reports Elias had provided. She had never felt more conflicted in her life. The Empire had been her life's purpose, but the more she saw of its decay, the more she realized it was a sinking ship. She had been a soldier, following orders without question, but now she was seeing things from a new perspective. And the truth was inescapable. The Xyloth Empire was a dying beast, and it needed to be put out of its misery. As she stared at the data, her mind drifted back to the conversation she had with Elias. He had spoken of hope, of a future without fear. He had made it sound so simple, but Cyril knew that breaking free from the chains of the past would not be easy. She had served the Emperor for so long, her loyalty had been absolute. But now, as she saw the crumbling foundations of the Empire, she realized that loyalty to a dying ruler was just another form of slavery. "General, we have a problem," one of her officers said, interrupting her thoughts. "There are rumors of a rebel cell forming within the fleet. We've tracked some unusual communications between certain officers." Cyril's eyes narrowed. She had expected as much. The Xyloth Empire was built on control, and when control started to slip, people began to act. Some would seize the opportunity for power, while others would look to escape the crumbling regime. Who are the officers involved? Tyrell asked, her voice cold and commanding. The officer hesitated. We've identified a few mid-ranking officers who have been in contact with the rebel forces. They're not acting openly, but there's enough evidence to suggest that they're planning something. Tyrell took a deep breath. The rebellion was growing stronger, and it was only a matter of time before it reached the upper ranks of the Empire. She knew that the time to act was fast approaching. If they were to bring down the Emperor, they needed more than just the support of the rebels. They needed the loyalty of the Empire's military leaders. I'll handle it, Tyrell said, her voice filled with resolve. Prepare a plan to neutralize them without raising suspicion. We can't afford any slip-ups. The officer nodded and quickly left to carry out her orders. As the officer disappeared, Tyrell stood still, her gaze fixed on the stars outside the command center. Elias's words echoed in her mind. You can be the one to lead them to a new future. It was a tempting thought, but also terrifying. Could she really lead the galaxy into a new era? Was she capable of bringing down the very system that had shaped her? Just then, her communication device buzzed. It was a secure message from Elias. The message began. The rebel leaders have agreed to meet. They want to form an alliance. We have to act fast. The Emperor is weakening, and every day we wait, he grows more dangerous. The time is now. Tyrell took a deep breath, her mind racing. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The Emperor's power was slipping, and now she had the chance to bring him down. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed the support of the Empire's military leaders, the ones who still believed in its strength, and the ones who had nothing left to lose. Tyrell stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. She had made her decision. There was no turning back now. She would meet with the rebel leaders and form an alliance, but she would also need to confront the officers loyal to the Emperor. They would either join her or become obstacles in her path. A few days later, Tyrell and Elias met in a secret location. The place was a remote outpost, far from the prying eyes of the Empire. The two of them were alone, their voices low as they discussed their plans. The rebel leaders are ready to join forces, Elias said. They trust you, Tyrell. They know you're the one with the power to make this happen. But there's a risk. If the wrong person gets wind of this alliance, it could all fall apart. Tyrell nodded. I know. That's why I've taken steps to neutralize the loyalists within the fleet. But it won't be enough. We need to move quickly, before the Emperor's forces can react. Elias leaned forward, his eyes serious. What do you need from me? I need you to coordinate with the rebel leaders. We'll need to strike at the heart of the Empire. And I need you to ensure that the resistance is ready when the time comes. We'll hit them from all sides. Elias looked at her, his expression resolute. We'll do it. Together. Tyrell took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their plan pressing down on her. This was no longer just a rebellion. It was a full-scale war, and it would either succeed or it would destroy them all. The time for waiting was over. The quiet tension that had settled over the galaxy now felt like a storm, gathering strength. Every move Elias and Tyrell made was more daring, more dangerous. They were walking on a tightrope, and one misstep could bring everything crashing down. But neither of them hesitated. They had made their choice, and there was no turning back. Tyrell had successfully neutralized the loyalist officers within the fleet, using her position and influence to carefully root out those who were too loyal to the Emperor. Her plan had worked. No one suspected a thing. The fleet's leadership was now aligned with her, and the rebel forces had grown stronger. Elias had managed to secure the trust of the leaders of several powerful rebel cells who had pledged their support for the upcoming strike. The Empire's control over the galaxy was crumbling, piece by piece. But the real challenge still lay ahead. The Emperor had to be taken down, and that would require more than just a rebellion. It would require precision, planning, and a bold strike at the heart of the Empire. Tyrell stood in the command center of the flagship, her eyes focused on the holographic display before her. The fleet was ready. The rebel leaders were waiting for the signal. Everything was in place. Elias entered the room, his usual calm demeanor now replaced with a seriousness that matched the weight of their mission. He had always been a man of action, but even he knew that this was their most dangerous move yet. "It's time," Tyrell said, her voice steady, but filled with an undeniable tension. "The Empire won't survive this." Elias nodded. "We strike tonight. The Emperor is weakened. We hit him while his forces are disorganized. The longer we wait, the more dangerous he becomes." Cyril's gaze remained fixed on the star charts. "I've already sent word to the fleet commanders. They're in position. We'll attack the Emperor's palace on Xyloth, and we'll take control of the central command hub. Once we have that, the rest of the Empire will fall into chaos. No one will be able to stop us." The plan was simple, but it was fraught with risk. The Emperor's palace was heavily guarded, and even though his health had been failing, he still held immense power. The palace was a symbol of the Empire's strength, and taking it would be a blow to the Emperor's fragile hold on the galaxy. I turned to Elias. "You're sure the rebels are ready? This isn't going to be a small skirmish. Once we strike, there will be no turning back." Elias met her gaze. "They're ready. We've prepared for this moment. We'll hit hard and fast, and we'll make sure the Emperor has no way of fighting back." As the time to strike approached, Tyrell felt a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when she would tear down the very empire she had once fought for. But even now, there were moments of doubt. Was she doing the right thing? Was she truly ready to bring about the destruction of everything she had ever known? But then she remembered the faces of the people, the ones who had suffered under the Emperor's reign, the countless lives that had been lost to his cruelty. She couldn't ignore the truth any longer. The Empire was a prison, and the only way to free the galaxy was to bring it down. The rebel fleet moved into position, their ships hidden in the shadow of nearby moons, waiting for the signal. Tyrell gave one final glance at the holographic map before speaking. "Prepare for launch," she ordered. "This is it." The command center was silent as the fleet commanders prepared their ships for the assault. Tyrell's mind raced with the strategy she had crafted, but even with everything in place, there was still a sense of unease. The Emperor's forces would not go down without a fight, and there were still pieces of the Empire's vast network that they hadn't accounted for, loyalists who would fight to the bitter end. But Tyrell pushed the doubts away. She couldn't afford to let them distract her now. "Captain," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "ready the fleet for immediate deployment. We're going to take down the Emperor tonight." As the ships in the fleet powered up and began to move into position, Tyrell's thoughts shifted to Elias. She had come to trust him more than she ever thought possible, but she knew this mission was bigger than either of them. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about changing the course of the galaxy itself. The fleet surged forward, and the battle to destroy the Emperor's regime began. The first wave of ships broke through the atmosphere of Xyloth's capital, their weapons primed for the assault. Tyrell led the charge, her ship leading the way as they approached the Emperor's palace. The massive structure loomed ahead, its towering spires and gleaming walls reflecting the pale light of the distant sun. But beneath its shining exterior, the palace was a fortress, and its defenses were formidable. "Prepare for impact," Tyrell ordered, her voice steady but sharp. The rebel ships opened fire, their weapons targeting the palace's defense systems. The battle was fierce, with explosions ripping through the air as laser blasts and missiles collided with the palace's shields. The Emperor's forces fought back with everything they had, but they were disorganized, their morale shattered by the weakening health of their ruler. Tyrell's ship was at the forefront of the assault, her crew moving with precision and skill. Every movement was part of a well-rehearsed plan. The moment the shields began to crack, they launched their final strike, penetrating deep into the palace's inner defenses. "Command center is ahead," Tyrell said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Keep moving forward." Elias's voice came through her comms. "We're on the ground. The palace is ours." Cyril's heart raced. They had made it. The Emperor's palace was theirs, but there was still one final obstacle to overcome: the Emperor himself. As she and her forces stormed the palace's inner halls, they encountered fierce resistance from the Emperor's elite guards, but they were no match for Cyril's skill and the firepower of the rebel forces. The elite guards fell one by one, and the path to the Emperor's throne room grew clearer with every passing second. Cyril's thoughts were consumed by one question: would the Emperor surrender, or would he die fighting? She wasn't sure which would be worse, but she knew the time to decide was almost up. The fate of the galaxy rested in her hands. The air was thick with tension as Cyril and her forces stormed the corridors of the Emperor's palace. The rebels were gaining ground, pushing through the palace's defenses, but the Emperor was not going to surrender easily. His elite guards, the most feared warriors in the galaxy, had already been dispatched to stop them, but Cyril's troops were relentless. The battle had only just begun, but she could feel the weight of it pressing on her chest. This was it, the moment they had all been waiting for. "Keep moving," Cyril shouted to her troops, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to reach the throne room." They moved quickly through the palace, leaving behind the wreckage of the Emperor's guards. The air was filled with the sounds of blaster fire, explosions, and the hurried footsteps of rebels. Cyril led the charge, her eyes locked ahead, determined not to falter. Elias's voice crackled in her comms. "We're almost there. The throne room is just ahead. Prepare for the final push." Cyril's heart raced as she pushed forward. She had never imagined that she would be here, standing at the gates of the Emperor's inner sanctum, leading the charge to tear down everything she had once believed in. But now, in the heat of battle, it all felt clear. The Empire, the Emperor, everything had to fall. If she didn't do this, the suffering would never end. The throne room doors loomed ahead, and the final line of defense was waiting. The Emperor's personal guards stood in formation, their eyes cold and filled with determination. They would not go down without a fight. But Cyril wasn't afraid. She had fought against the best of the Xyloth Empire. She had faced the fiercest battles, and she had always come out victorious. The doors to the throne room burst open, and the Emperor's guards charged forward, weapons raised. Cyril met them head-on, her blade flashing as she cut through their ranks with ruthless efficiency. She didn't hesitate, didn't flinch. This was what she had been trained for. This was the moment she had been preparing for her entire life. The battle raged on, but Cyril's mind was focused. She knew what was coming. The Emperor was waiting for them, and his power was still formidable. He had survived for so long by controlling the galaxy through fear, and she knew he would not go quietly. But he had underestimated her. He had underestimated the strength of the rebels and the power of the people who were ready to rise up. After what felt like an eternity, the final guard fell. Cyril stood at the entrance of the throne room, her breath heavy but steady. Elias was at her side, his face grim but determined. "Let's finish this," he said, his voice filled with resolve. Together, they entered the throne room, and there he was. The Emperor. His once imposing form was now frail, his face pale and sickly. He was seated on his throne, surrounded by holographic images of his empire, his vast kingdom of terror and control. But the light in his eyes was fading. The Emperor knew his time had come. Cyril stepped forward, her gaze fixed on him. "It's over," she said, her voice steady, yet filled with the weight of everything that had led them here. "Your empire ends tonight." The Emperor laughed, though it was weak and hollow. "You think you can destroy what I've built? The galaxy will never be free. You are nothing but a pawn in a game you don't understand." Cyril's expression remained cold. "I'm not a pawn, and neither are the people of this galaxy." She stepped closer, her voice growing stronger. You've ruled with fear, but it's over. The people are rising, and there's nothing you can do to stop them. Your time has ended." The emperor sneered, his hand shaking as he reached for a hidden weapon beneath his throne. But before he could draw it, Ilias stepped forward, blocking his path. "It's time to face the consequences of your actions." The emperor's face twisted with rage as he lunged forward. But Cyril was faster. In one swift motion, she disarmed him, sending his weapon flying across the room. The emperor collapsed into his throne, his strength gone. "This is your end," Cyril said, her voice quiet but filled with finality. "You've caused enough pain. The galaxy will be free." For a moment, there was silence. The emperor looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of defiance and fear. But Cyril saw the truth now. The man who had ruled the galaxy with an iron fist was nothing more than a broken, powerless figure. You think the galaxy will be better without me?" The emperor whispered, his voice shaking. "The galaxy needs someone strong, someone who can control it. You can't." Cyril's voice was calm and unwavering. "No, the galaxy needs someone who can lead it with compassion, with justice, someone who can give the people hope. And that is not you." She turned to Ilias, her eyes filled with determination. "The emperor is finished. It's time for a new beginning." Ilias nodded, his face resolute. "We'll rebuild. Together." Cyril looked back at the emperor one last time, her expression unflinching. "The galaxy is no longer yours to command. Your reign ends here." With that, she and Ilias turned their backs on the broken emperor, leaving him behind as they stepped into the future, a future where the people would no longer live in fear. As the news of the emperor's fall spread across the galaxy, the people rose up. The military defected, the loyalists scattered, and the empire that had once seemed invincible crumbled into dust. The rebels who had fought for freedom were now the heroes of a new era. The galaxy was no longer ruled by fear. A new government was formed, built on the values of justice, hope, and equality. Cyril and Ilias stood together as the first steps toward rebuilding were taken. The path ahead would not be easy, but it would be theirs to shape. They had fought for this moment, and they had won. The galaxy was free, and for the first time in a long time, Cyril felt the weight of her past lift off her shoulders. She had found her true purpose, not as a soldier of an empire, but as a leader of the people. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to decide.